Hey guys, today I want to talk about perspectives, specifically asceticism, and how it can drastically change the quality of our lives. A key thing to establish here is that life and all the enjoyments and criticisms we have of it can be made of completely out of perspectives. How we view the world, how we're brought up, kind of our identity, all contribute to the perspective we have in the world. Do you ever wonder why some people are always irritable, while some other people, specifically monks or some very spiritually trained people, seem to just have love, infinite love and generosity and gratuity towards the world? That contrast has always been interesting to me, and I kind of want to talk about how that happens. And I believe it all comes from perspective. If I were to question your life, assuming that you're kind of in the same situation as me, like a middle class, upper middle class, where you're just comfortable in life. Like I live in America, I'm pretty comfortable. I have the assumption that I never have to worry about food. I can always count on having food on the dinner table. I can always count on never starving. And that's my perspective. You realize that that same idea and that same assumption would not be the same if it was a hunter-gatherer who's always scavenging for food, or even or even the very impoverished countries where people have to worry about if they make enough money to get enough food. So you see how that's a perspective. Additionally, it's the same perspective that I would be excited by like getting a new iPhone. If I were to find a new iPhone on the street, I would be excited. But you see how if that was in a different country, maybe in a different world where they even know what iPhones were, they would not have that same intuitive understanding of what that's worth. They would not even think it's worth anything. So it's all about perspectives here. I gain happiness not from the fact that I have food on my table, because we're honestly not even appreciative of a lot of people nowadays, because we just never had a problem with it. But we only take happiness when we get like an iPhone. So I hope you can kind of hear how that can become problematic in the sense of making the tolerance for happiness in your life so much harder. If the only things that really make you happy are things that are like secondary instinct, super expensive things or super just out of place things, and it's not a daily occurrence, you're only going to be happy occasionally. However, if you're able to change your perspective, and this is my main argument because I believe that the mind is one of the only things you have control over, not complete control, but a very good amount of control over. I would say almost complete in the world. In the messy world where everything's overbearing and seems to just go on its own, our mind is only the thing in control. This follows Stoicism, in the sense that we can control what our thoughts are. And I think in the same way, we can control our perspectives, not necessarily saying voluntarily from one second change our perspectives, but more so from living a kind of different life to gain a different identity, to find what's enriching, and that changes your perspective slowly. An example of this is asceticism, which is historically known to be a path in which someone tries to find spiritual enlightenment through abstinence and worldly pleasures, abandoning material goods and materialistic values, celibacy, isolation, and fasting, even. And that's the historical sense, used with a lot of picture of like a monk walking around the streets, kind of begging for food every night. But we don't have to specifically follow that exact same approach. We can still practice this idea of asceticism if maybe you just try to focus on having less objects around your house, like getting rid of a bunch of junk, rid of clutter, maybe cutting down on the stuff that you don't absolutely need, such as any technology that sometimes you don't need, and these fun gadgets, and cutting down drastically to get to the bare minimum of life. It's kind of hard to do within the confines of your home, but if you were to do something like go on a solo trip where you're just completely stripped of everything you have except for maybe a few articles of clothes, some hygiene products, and that's it. and you have like like $10 every day to get some food, that's you're kind of practicing there an ascetic life. And what I think the result of doing something like that, especially for extended duration of time, is that you really come to terms with what is important. I think you'll find that through that path, you'll realize that even without anything that you've had before in your previously materialistic life, without any of that, you can still find happiness within the very primitive things, such as being able to share a meal with someone you meet, being able to wake up to a sunny day, being able to walk on that sunny day, being able to see beautiful pieces of culture and buildings in all these different places, and being healthy, being able to be on the world. And I think you can see that through living an ascetic life, and where you release everything else in this world that is given you, and you realize that everything that really matters is so basic and primitive. And so I'm not saying either that you have to stick with that life and you have to keep with it, but kind of experiencing something like that, taking the core lessons and bringing it back to your 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 previous life can do you tremendous value in changing your perspectives. I mentioned earlier that you would never assume food to be a scarcity. You would always assume food to be on your table. But after like a month of doing that ascetic lifestyle, maybe some days you can't really buy food. Maybe some days you have to beg for food. You realize the generosity, I mean the gratefulness you have now for food. Okay, obviously you don't have to go for that extreme. You don't have to starve yourself. That's a very intense approach, but I'm saying you still feel that kind of gratefulness for a lot of things that you never had before. Gratefulness for your friends, gratefulness for your family, gratefulness for your shelter, gratefulness for your bed, gratefulness for everything. And it's tremendous. The way it dramatically makes you grateful for everything increases your mood and your happiness overall. You can't be sad, you can't be upset when you realize that you have everything which you know you could not have in the first place. But because we all live in this life where we never experience the other side of it, we're always up in our heads about how we feel ungrateful of everything, we take everything for granted, and things that make us happy are has to be up to that next extreme. And a life like that, where you never realize that have gratuity for what you have, I feel is incredibly depressing. So I think it's a lesson that, an idea that I want to kind of plant within everyone's mind in the sense that an experience where you really get down to minimalistic lifestyle, where you have nothing, asceticism, and trying that in any way possible. You don't have to go travel. You don't have to. You can just do it at your home. You just practicing that can give you a very different worldview that I believe can influence and help many people's lives. Thank you.